Welcome to the Dirt on Growing, where we don't just plant seeds, we plant ideas that challenge the norm. I'm your host, Brandon Rust from Fulcrop Sciences, and this is the podcast where living soil meets real science. From worm castings to bottled nutrients, microbial inoculants, and chemical pesticides, we're here to question the trends, break down the data, and empower your grow. It's time to think deeper and grow better. What's going on, everybody? Brandon Rust here at Fulcrop Sciences. Welcome to another live episode of the Dirt on Growing podcast. Today I wanted to talk about the future of fertilizers. So you guys all know me, and you guys know that I'm a huge proponent of sustainability and regenerative agricultural practices. And when we're looking at conventional chemical fertilizers and we're looking at the logistics and the resources needed to produce those, it doesn't make a lot of sense when we start to break it down. And so I can give you an example. The Haber-Bosch process, the way that it functions is it pulls atmosphere, it puts it under pressure and uses a catalyst to split that nitrogen into, and it precipitates into ammonium. This process is very, very inefficient and requires a massive amount of energy. The same kind of principles that are used to manufacture things like phosphate fertilizer go hand in hand with nitrogen. So the resources that are needed and the energy that is needed for the production of these fertilizers is huge. When we're talking about phosphorus fertilizers, to be able to produce phosphorus fertilizers, you first need a apatite material, or you need to find rock phosphorus that has a high enough percentage of phosphorus in it to be able to extract it efficiently and cost efficiently. But to be able to do that, you have to first build and manufacture a facility that can produce sulfuric acid. So you have to manufacture sulfuric acid before you can actually make phosphorus fertilizer. And so once the resource is acquired, it's crushed down and then it's attacked. They micronize that material and they bring the sulfuric acid to it, and that sulfuric acid starts to dissolve that material and it liberates the phosphate. And then they separate that phosphate and then they'll mix that with the ammonium to make things like DAP and MAP. If we're talking about calcium nitrate or the production of calcium nitrate, you have to be able to produce nitric acid, and that is used to attack things like high calcium apatite material. And during that process, it liberates the calcium ions from that material and it binds with the nitric acid, dissolves that calcium material, and that calcium bonds with the nitrogen to make calcium nitrate. Now, all these things, they take a massive amount of energy. So if we're talking about, let's say, the production of urea, where they first have to manufacture nitrogen through the Haber-Bosch process, and then they have to blend it with CO2 to create the urea, it takes 66 million BTUs of energy. It's a fucking massive, massive amount of energy. And so if we're looking at it from a logistics standpoint, the production of our conventional fertilizers are very cost ineffective. They take a lot of resource and they take a lot of energy. And the only places that it really makes sense to manufacture these fertilizers is where that resource is naturally available. So in the case of phosphorus, right? So we have Morocco has the largest reserves of phosphorus. China has the second largest reserves. And down in Florida, the U.S. has the third largest reserve. However, these reserves, they start to dwindle, right? The ability to acquire high quality material that is readily accessible decreases as we move into the future and move towards what's called peak phosphorus. And peak phosphorus is essentially the point at which the amount of fertilizer that we use reaches the it's either greater or at the level of what we're able to manufacture. And so we're reaching that point to where the raw material to make these things are becoming harder to acquire, or the material isn't as high quality, and so more energy and more resources is needed to create that same product. So after it's all said and done, most of these chemical fertilizers, they're manufactured internationally, and then they have to be logistically imported. So the logistics that come, that when we're talking about these fertilizers, it's about resource, energy, and logistics. And all of these things are very inefficient. And at the very end of the day, that fertilizer has a very low use efficiency. And that's why we have so many problems with the environmental pollution from chemical fertilizers. It's not that they don't work, it's that they're so highly reactive and so highly soluble that they bind with other elements in the soil, tying those things up. And then things like nitrates and phosphates, which have a negative charge, they don't stick to the soil colloids, and so they end up into our streams and riverways. And so we've been, heavily using these types of chemical fertilizers for the last 60 years or so. And when you're looking at the future of fertilizers, you have to think in terms of resource, energy, and logistics. And so what I've seen a giant increase in chemical fertilizer alternatives, things that are looking at plant and soil health from a holistic perspective, as opposed to just looking at a soil test and saying, oh, the soil needs this much of this much of this, and this much of this. The future of farming involves rebuilding soils through adding carbon and microbial diversity to help improve the bioavailability of what's already in those soils, to improve soil structure, to improve the water holding capacity and the gas exchange capacity of those, to stimulate the soil microbiome, to increase carbon storage levels. Those are all things that the future of fertilizers are all looking at, because over the past 60 years, what we've seen in conventional crop production is the health and fertility of that soil as a system has exponentially decreased with the acidification of soil organic matter, or the carbon that is in that soil. So what's happening is the chemical fertilizers that are being applied to these soils, it's acidifying and liberating. It's converting that organic matter into CO2. So that's both bad for the atmosphere and bad for the soil, because when you are able to store carbon long term in the soil, you increase the efficiency of things like the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle, micronutrient cycling, carbon cycling. All of those dynamics exponentially increase to create situations where you get better bioavailability of nutrients, where you get increased cation exchange capacity, where you get increased water penetration, infiltration, and storage. So when we're thinking about the future of fertilizers, the reason why I placed myself in this business and really wanted to dive deep is because I really wanted to figure out the solutions for the problems that we're going to face in the future. And looking at the future of how fertilizers are produced, looking at fertilizer technology, looking at the use efficiency, looking at the environmental impacts, those are all problems that need to be solved, right? And so, Dr. George, who created the humate fertilizer, He was ahead of his time. He was looking at all of these different aspects when it came to fertilizer and soil health, taking a holistic view and approach to how these things should be done. And so he developed this formulation. He figured out, how to decrease the impact on resource and how he could come up with a complete solution to all of the problems that conventional fertilizers have. So when we're talking about the future of fertilizer technology, I've seen more companies that are doing things with ferments, taking things like green waste or taking plant matter and fermenting those to rapidly decompose the organic matter to liberate the nutrient ions, while also simultaneously stimulating the microbes in that ferment. So that way you're not just getting a fertilizer, you're not just getting the NPK and the secondary micronutrients, but you're also getting all of the metabolites that those microbes are producing, all the sidiophores, all of the polysaccharides, all of the phytohormones, all of the organic acids and enzymes. And so whenever I'm looking at fertilization, I'm not just looking at adding nutrients. I'm looking at adding biology or stimulating biology through carbon dynamics, because again, those carbon dynamics exponentially improve all of those systems that nature so wonderfully constructed for us. I also see things like this, the NutriGrow pot, as one of the things that I can contribute to the future of fertilizers, to where you can have, where you're not just creating a fertilizer product, but you're creating a delivery method while not only solving the fertilizer process problems that we have in conventional agriculture, but you're also solving the plastic problem that we have for single-use containers and disposable plastics. And so anytime that I'm thinking about, how I can improve things from a resource and energy, from a logistics, from when we're talking about fertilizers, I always want to make sure that we're solving an issue that exists and improving the processes that we implement into crop production, not just to maximize the yield, but to also improve quality while simultaneously building soil health and fertility year after year. With a lot of the new fertilizer technologies or the new types of products, whether it's humate fertilizers or whether it is things like Roots Organics, where they have microbial fertilizers, they're solving multiple problems at once. They're not just taking a single approach. They're taking a holistic approach. And I believe that over the course of the next decade, we're going to see a massive transition in this space, because we have people, for instance, like RFK, right? He says things like regenerative agriculture, sustainability, environmental protection. These words were once niche in agriculture, but they're becoming more and more mainstream. And so more people are taking a look at, human health related to agriculture and looking at human health in relation to soil quality and soil health and fertility. And so I think a lot of these processes that have, that were developed, in the 1800s that haven't changed much since are going to quickly start to shift, because more people are educating themselves, the general public is, and farmers are now looking at ways to not just cut costs, but look at soil from a holistic approach. Okay, instead of just adding fertilizer, how can I decrease my costs over the long term? Standard practice is to try to cultivate for as cheaply as you can. And that's because the bottom line really matters, because there's such thin profit margins in conventional agricultural products and conventional cropping. But when you take a step back and say, okay, if I continue to do it like this, I'm going to have to do it like this every single year. But if you're taking an approach where you say, hey, you know what, I'm going to spend a little bit money up front this year, so that way next year I can spend a little bit less money, and then by the third, fourth, fifth year, my soil has everything in it, and all I need to do is proper maintenance. Because a lot of these products, like the humic fertilizer, for instance, after a couple of years of crop production and using this in soils, you're increasing the soil fertility long term. You're increasing that carbon. So again, we go back to the increased efficiency of all of those natural processes like phosphorus cycling, nitrogen cycling, carbon cycling, nutrient cycling. And so long term, farmers are taking, a new approach, is what I'm saying. I've been working with people all across the country, and before it was like, how can I decrease my overhead? What can I do? Can I do a soil test and just add what I need? Yes, you can. You can add synthetics and you can add this and that and that. But when it comes down to it, you're not going to get to the point, that soil's not going to get to the point where you're no longer going to need to continually add chemicals or fertilizers all the time to produce your crops. So that's the idea with these new fertilizer technologies, and a lot of the fertilizers and the products that are coming out on the market is to increase over time the health and soil fertility, so that way we can protect the land and manage it properly. But really what we're doing in North Dakota, so we've got the project, we've submitted everything. Some of you may or may not know, I partnered up with NASA Agricultural Technologies. We started a company called Carbotech Technologies, and in the future, we're going to be manufacturing 10,000 metric tons of humic fertilizer from coal waste. So we're going to take all of the waste from the coal mines up there, we're going to convert it into a high-efficiency carbon-based fertilizer. And that does a bunch of things. The future isn't just, it's carbon-based. Okay, well, what about, implementing these types of infrastructures into pre-existing models, industrial models, to change those models that can be more sustainable, to have green manufacturing, to take waste that would once get buried or have to be remediated in some other manner, to have it be converted into a high efficiency product that works better than conventional fertilizers. So we have submitted all of our documents to the insurance company for performance guarantee. We're raising $5 million, and in the future, we're going to start building. Hopefully within the next 6 months, we'll have a location put out. We'll have all of our equipment being installed. And when we do that, it is going to give an opportunity for agriculture. And even though we're a very, very, very small amount of the global production, it'll allow people to convert from those synthetic chemicals and use the humates as a bridge to regenerative or sustainable agricultural practices. And it only really takes, for someone to use it one time to see how efficient and effective it is. But that's the plan. The plan is to scale up these systems, to integrate them into pre-existing industrial systems like the production of energy, coal mining, and restructure the way that these things perform so that they're more environmentally friendly. They make more sense logistically from efficiency and energy and a resource standpoint. If you guys got any comments, questions, let me know. I'm going to open it up. I just wanted to hop on here real quick and get some information out. The NutriGrow pot's another fertilizer technology that's going to be great because we can scale that to any size, seed starters, large pots. And the goal is to eliminate all of the plastic waste. So when you go into like a Home Depot, Walmart, or a garden center and you get yourself a little 6-pack of tomatoes that comes in this little flimsy piece of throwaway plastic, we can get rid of that. And we just have it in a cup, eliminate transplant shock, all that other stuff. I'm not seeing any of the comments. I'm not sure if there's anybody posting let's see here. If you are in the live and you are listening, drop a comment. I want to see if my comments are working here, which it doesn't seem to be. So we'll have to figure that out. Why isn't my comment section working? Oh, whoops, I don't know why that showed up. Huh, weird. The chat comments are not functioning here. So I guess I'm not going to do a Q&A today. I got to troubleshoot this, figure out what's going on. But I'm going to end it here today. Thanks for joining, everybody. I will see you guys soon.